So why is it time for a Canadian dollar stablecoin? We've had multiple currency stablecoins for years. I mean, there's been lots of Canadian and Great British pounds and euros and all kinds of different currency stablecoins, really starting from 2018, 2019. Everybody looked at the USDC model and said, that's great. We could make our hedging easier. We can move our books around quicker. Let's go and do it. And then you tried and saw a lot of these multiple currency stablecoins ultimately fail. And mostly because the domestic trading in these other currencies isn't necessarily there. Almost all, especially in digital asset world today, almost all of that trading ultimately backstops onto US dollars. And so when you have domestic cryptocurrency trading in different countries around the world, it's generally just representations of real books based in US dollars with an FX spread based in and not a real market being made in those currencies. And so one of the kind of the key things around why it makes sense, or what's a key driver of a Canadian dollar stablecoin, is actually connectivity with the US dollar. If you always have to jump out of a coin to get into fiat in order to hedge out your book, in order to access that American dollar liquidity, it's basically like having fiber to the home and then dial up, right? Or fiber to the curb and then dial up right inside the actual home itself. With on-chain FX and the ability to stay in foreign exchange or stay in digital assets throughout the entire life of a transaction, that's a massive change in the industry. It's a massive change in the game. I mean, think about how much friction is in correspondent banking in general, and think about how that translates into the broader scope of global commerce. And every time you leave a jurisdiction, or every time you leave a currency, there's a ton of built-in friction. And so a lot of these native currency or local currency stablecoins have withered and died on the vine because there's just not enough volume in that domestic on-chain world to justify it. And that's fine. That made complete sense at the time when there was really that infrastructure. But ultimately, now there is. And that's a ton of the stuff that we've been working on at StableCorp, is really lighting up that cross-border infrastructure, making those currency pairs that are institutionally priced. Because it's one thing to have a Bitcoin spread that's 1% or 2%, as Bitcoin fluctuates that much every day. It's a complete other thing to have a spread on foreign exchange where people are used to basis points and you're charging percents. And so really creating those liquid, institutionally priced on-chain FX pairs is one of the key pieces that's ready and red, why there's a rational reason for a Canadian dollar stablecoin at this stage of the game. So moving a little bit further, and thinking about, stablecoins in general have had this idea and mandate of payments and what we're going to use for global money movement and changing the efficiencies of the global financial system ever since they really started in kind of in 2015 or 2016. And we've never the on-chain FX side, but also we've never really built out the delivery mechanisms for those types of use cases before. And so when we start to think about, the value proposition of a stablecoin, sure, we've always thought about it in crypto trading terms. I can lock in my gains in a local currency or a domestic currency, and take it out of Bitcoin, swap it over to another exchange super fast, do some arbitrage, all of those things, which are all great, fantastic use cases. Capital markets use cases, crypto trading use cases, amazing, very low-hanging fruit. But a lot of it is we've always sort of held up this hallmark of programmatic commerce, just-in-time financing, things like that are much more traditional uses of business. And there's trillions of dollars trapped in unused cash that people are holding because they can't wait for a T+1 settlement if they need to draw down on a line of credit. They can't wait for some of these things to be able to actually flow through a structure of finance. I mean, imagine if you are a supply chain financer and you don't need to hold any capital on hand, because the second somebody comes to you with an invoice, that the fact that invoice came automatically triggers a smart contract. You can call on a committed facility that's held farther upstream, who can even call on another committed facility that's held even farther upstream, who's holding it on compound. And the second that invoice hits, a series of back-to-back smart contract hits, you have capital to fund that invoice in, if you're using Algorand or one of the newer chains, 10 seconds, 25 seconds, those sequence of transaction hits. And you basically create this extremely efficient flow of capital, just like what just-in-time manufacturing did for the car industry. You can basically have that with financing that. And you absolutely just cannot do that with traditional types of finance, a T+1, T+2 settlement, particularly. And you can expand that to a global setting. Your capital can live in a different country. If you have instantaneous on-chain FX and all of these back-to-back smart contracts, you can move money around the globe instantly and on demand. And that's a completely different way of moving money and a completely different way of building commercial paradigms. And sure, that's great in the US and where there is sort of a relatively robust stablecoin market already. But now it's time to build it in other places. And the Canadian-US border is one of the most active cross-border commerce corridors in the entire world. The Canadian-US dollar fiat pair is the fifth most traded FX pair in the entire world as well. And so what better place to start it than in Canada and US? Very similar laws, very similar structures, very similar economics rules, and a very, very close existing commerce relationship. And the third piece to this puzzle of why it makes sense now is really what's happening in the banking world. And new innovation is a byproduct of frictions. And when things are too easy in the traditional world, it's really hard to create disruptive new innovation. And you see this in emerging markets, and you see it when entire old structures are just skipped over. Landlines never really happened in Africa. We went straight to mobile. You'd see it in the emergence of satellite internet in certain places that are skipping that whole cable deployment as well. And you can see it in payments as well in Africa, where mobile payments are sort of the go-to default because there isn't that card network, there isn't that built-in POS infrastructure. And so when you start to see when there's readily available banking and it's easy to sort of use a traditional fiat rail, you say, yeah, okay, I can do it a little bit quicker with blockchain, but it's not too bad. And you have that sort of best alternative that's pretty tight and pretty close. And then all of a sudden, a whole bunch of banks either went away or said, hey, you can't do this business with us anymore. And so into that gap, step stablecoins. If you don't have a bank account, you can effectively, if the infrastructure is all there, run the exact same type of structure with a stablecoin wallet. The on and off ramps are really where kind of the choke points are, and creating those client denominated or those client name bank accounts to be able to accept client funds in. So with this rise of virtual accounts, and we've already seen it for a while, we've already seen the rise of virtual accounts over the last couple of years with a lot of banking as a service, with PayPal, with a lot of these ideas of embedded finance that fintechs are now virtual accounts sitting on top of sponsor banks. A lot of people are ready to abstract away that banking layer directly. And then when the banking layer sort of abstracts itself by saying, hey, we're not doing this business anymore, that's a big gap that needs to be filled. And the joy of it is that stablecoins are already kind of 80, 90% there. So you're basically abstracting away the banking layer and relying on a stablecoin issuer to manage the reserves and the underlying fiat. And it's sort of like a virtual account on steroids. You can use that national global rail. You can rely on a transparent banking solution provider, in many cases, much more transparent than what virtual accounts are actually doing, or payment services providers like PayPal, who you don't really know what they're actually doing with your reserves. You sort of have an account on the front end, but there's not a ton of transparencies into some of these reserve structures. And so you're basically outsourcing your banking requirements to a USDC or another type of solution that manages it that manages the banking relationship on your behalf. And it's really, again, it's about, okay, if I'm a business and I'm trying to use these solutions to allow my customers to finance on demand, or if I'm a trading place and I don't want to manage customer fiat anymore because it's such a challenge now, then if you can basically create the structures whereby your customers can send fiat into a system, and everything then settles in stablecoins, and you basically run stablecoins throughout your entire structure. A, you can create an incredibly efficient business model, but B, if you have partners that can manage that sort of fiat on and off ramping and do it in an economical way, then you don't have to manage the fiat banking leg of that transaction. Especially in a place like Canada and where the US is going more and more, you end up the biggest time and the biggest unknown about starting a new business that touches digital assets at all is the bank account side of it. And if you can't get a bank account, you cannot launch. And so you end up in this like, is it 3 months? Is it 9 months? Is it 18 months? Is it going to cost me $10,000? Is it going to cost me $100,000? You can do all the marketing and all the sort of pre-selling in the world, but until you firm up your banking relationships, you can't really do much. You can't really get to market. And so if you can start having these on and off ramping, as a service type solutions that go directly to your client, you can basically cut out that giant friction point, that giant endpoint. And that's where we've seen a lot of the value or the demand for stablecoins is these sort of embedded stablecoin solutions that take what fintechs are already trying to do today with embedded finance, and just rip out the inefficient banking layer and replace it with hyper efficient blockchain layers. And so all of those three things together of on-chain FX, institutional grade stablecoins, and then this embedded stablecoin as a service type solutions, it's really time for stablecoins to take the next leap. It's time to get past crypto trading, although that's a phenomenal, fantastic short-term use case. It's time to get into embedded stablecoin solutions. It's time to get into just-in-time financing. It's time to really make on-chain FX work. It's time to make programmatic finance and programmatic commerce more than just a buzzword we talk about on panels, and make it real. And that's really what we're working on and what we're doing a lot of with our Grapes API solution, with the relaunch of QCAD that we've just done, and ultimately with a lot of the B2B partnerships that we're working on and will be coming live soon. So thanks very much for listening. Talk soon.